The iron shackles around Grishka's wrists had worn her green skin raw during the 3-day journey, but she kept her tusked jaw set firm as the wagon rattled through the estate gates, refusing to let these humans see an orc woman break. She had been sold as part of a political arrangement between her defeated clan and the victorious human lords of the borderlands, a living token of surrender meant to serve in the grand manner of House Rothwell until her debt was paid or she died, whichever came first. The other servants whispered and pointed as she was hauled from the wagon, their faces twisted with disgust and fear at the sight of her muscled frame, her pointed ears, and the small tusks that jutted from her lower jaw. No one had bothered to explain her actual purpose here. They simply saw an orc and assumed she belonged in the kitchens or the stables, anywhere far from polite society. "Get her to the scullery," the head steward barked, not even looking at the papers that had accompanied her transport. "We need extra hands for the wedding feast preparations. The young master is finally taking a bride, and we will have nobility from 3 provinces attending." Grishka wanted to protest, to show them the documents that proved she was meant to be a lady's companion, educated in letters and music as part of her clan's attempt to foster peace, but the guards shoved her forward before she could speak. Her people had spent 2 years teaching her the human tongue, their customs, their dances and etiquette, all in hopes that she might serve as a bridge between their worlds. Now she stumbled through the servants' entrance with her fine education dismissed as worthless, just another green-skinned savage to scrub pots and haul water. The kitchen was chaos. Dozens of servants rushed between preparation tables, their arms full of vegetables, cuts of meat, and sacks of flour. The heat from the cooking fires made the air shimmer, and the head cook, a stern woman with flour in her graying hair, pointed Grishka toward a mountain of dirty pots without a word of greeting. "You will scrub until those shine like mirrors," the cook said, her lip curling. "And keep your tusks away from the food. I will not have guests thinking we let monsters breathe on their meals." Grishka bit back the sharp retort that rose in her throat. She was strong enough to snap this woman's wooden spoon with one hand, but violence would only confirm their worst beliefs about her kind. So she rolled up the sleeves of her travel-stained dress, a garment that had once been fine but now hung torn and dirty on her frame, and set to work on the pots with the same dignity her mother had shown even in defeat, hours blurred together in a haze of scalding water and lye soap. Her hands, calloused from combat training but unused to this particular labor, grew raw and blistered. The other kitchen servants gave her a wide berth, whispering when they thought she could not hear. Monster, beast, why would the master allow such a creature under his roof? Some speculated she was a prisoner of war, others that she had been captured raiding human settlements, and none bothered to ask her the truth. As evening fell, the head steward returned to inspect the preparations. He moved through the kitchen with practiced efficiency, checking every detail, and Grishka kept her head down and continued scrubbing, hoping to avoid further humiliation. But then another figure entered behind the steward, and the entire kitchen fell silent. Grishka glanced up and saw a young man, perhaps 25 winters old, with dark hair and serious gray eyes. He wore the fine clothes of nobility, but carried himself without the arrogance she had learned to expect from human lords. He was tall and lean, with the bearing of someone who had spent time in military service, and he surveyed the kitchen with quiet attention to detail. "Master Benedict," the steward said with a bow, "I did not expect you to inspect the kitchens personally. Everything is well in hand for tomorrow's ceremony." So this was the groom, Benedict Rothwell, the man whose wedding would unite two powerful families and secure peace along the borderlands. Grishka returned to her scrubbing, wanting no part of noble attention. In her experience, when powerful humans noticed orcs, pain usually followed. "I like to know what happens in every corner of my family's estate," Benedict said, his voice calm and measured. "My father may have handled things one way, but now that I am taking over these responsibilities, I want to understand how things truly work." He moved through the kitchen, greeting servants by name, asking about their needs and concerns, and Grishka found herself surprised by his genuine interest. Most nobles treated servants as invisible furniture, present only to fulfill needs and otherwise beneath notice. But this Benedict stopped to thank a young scullery maid for her hard work, asked a cook about his daughter's illness, and inquired whether the staff needed additional help with the increased workload. Then his circuit brought him to Grishka's corner, where she knelt by the wash basin with her arms elbow-deep in greasy water. She kept her eyes down, hoping he would pass by without comment, but his footsteps stopped just beside her. "I do not recognize you," Benedict said, and there was curiosity in his tone rather than suspicion. "Are you new to the household?" Before Grishka could answer, the head steward interjected smoothly. "She is the orc we received 3 days ago, young master. Extra hands for the wedding preparations, as you can see. She is proving surprisingly useful in the scullery." Grishka's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. What would be the point? They had already decided what she was worth. But then Benedict did something that made every person in the kitchen freeze in shock. He stepped forward, took Grishka's wet, soapy hand, and helped her to her feet with a gentle but firm grip. Then, before she could process what was happening, he bowed to her, a proper formal bow of the sort nobles gave to honored guests. "My lady," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the sudden silence, "I believe there has been a terrible mistake." Grishka stared at him, her heart pounding in her chest. No human had ever called her lady before, not even in her own clan's dealings with the borderland lords. Her people had tusks and green skin. They were called monster, savage, beast, but never lady. "Master Benedict, I do not understand," the steward sputtered. "This is just an orc servant. She was sent here under terms of the peace treaty as a companion and cultural liaison," Benedict said, his tone still calm but with an edge of steel beneath it. "I reviewed all the treaty documents last week as part of preparing to take over my father's affairs. Lady Grishka of the Stonefist clan, educated in letters, music, and diplomacy, sent to serve as a bridge between our peoples." He turned to look at the steward with disappointment clear in his gray eyes. "Did you even read the papers that came with her transport?" The steward's face had gone white. "Aye. There was so much to prepare, young master, I assumed." "You assumed that because she is an orc, she must belong in the kitchens," Benedict finished. "And now a lady sent under treaty protections has spent 3 days scrubbing pots while wearing shackles." He looked at Grishka's raw wrists, and his expression hardened further. "Get those chains off her immediately, and someone find her proper quarters and clothing suitable for a guest of this house." The kitchen erupted into hasty activity as servants scrambled to follow orders, but Grishka remained frozen, unable to process this sudden reversal. Benedict was still holding her hand, she realized, his grip warm and steady. "I apologize on behalf of House Rothwell," he said, meeting her eyes directly. "You were sent here in good faith, and we have treated you shamefully. I will make this right." Grishka found her voice, though it came out rougher than she intended. Why what? Why do you care?" She gestured at herself, at her green skin and tusks. "I am an orc. Your people see monsters when they look at us. It would be easier to let me scrub pots and ignore the paperwork." Benedict's expression softened, and he squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. Because treaties mean nothing if we do not honor them, even in small details. Because my family's honor demands we treat guests with respect regardless of their race. And because... He paused, choosing his words carefully. Because I have fought orcs in battle, and I have seen your people's courage and strength. If we are ever to have real peace, it will only come from seeing each other clearly, without the prejudice that blinds us. A servant rushed up with a key and fumbled to unlock Grishka's shackles. The iron fell away, and she rubbed her sore wrists, still half convinced this was some elaborate joke at her expense. But Benedict was already issuing more orders, insisting she be given rooms in the guest wing, sending for the house physician to tend her injuries, arranging for proper meals to be sent up. "The wedding is tomorrow," he said to her as servants began to guide her out of the kitchen. "You must be exhausted from your ordeal, so please rest and recover. After the ceremony, once things settle down, I would like to speak with you properly about your role here and how we can make your time with us meaningful." Grishka nodded, unable to form words. As she was led through the manor's elegant halls, past tapestries and paintings and all the wealth of human nobility, she kept replaying the moment in her mind. A human lord bowing to an orc and calling her "my lady" in front of his entire household. It made no sense according to everything she had learned about the world, and yet it had happened. The guest room they brought her to was larger than any space she had ever occupied, with a real bed piled with soft blankets, a wash basin with clean water, and windows that looked out over the estate gardens. A physician arrived shortly after, a kindly older man who clucked his tongue over her blistered hands and raw wrists, applying salves and bandages with professional efficiency. "Master Benedict was quite distressed when he learned of your treatment," the physician said as he worked. "He takes matters of honor very seriously, perhaps more so than his father did. You will find him a fair man, if a bit intense about doing what is right." After the physician left, servants brought food. Real food, not kitchen scraps, with roasted meat and fresh bread and vegetables seasoned with herbs. Grishka ate slowly, savoring each bite while trying to understand what had changed so drastically in the span of an hour. She had arrived expecting a life of servitude and prejudice, and instead found herself in a guest room being called "my lady" by the estate's heir. She slept better that night than she had in weeks, despite everything, and woke to the sounds of the estate coming alive for the wedding. Servants rushed through the halls, musicians tuned their instruments in the great hall, and Grishka could smell the feast being prepared even from her distant room. She dressed in the clean clothes that had been left for her, simple but well-made garments more suited to a companion than a scullery maid, and wondered what she was supposed to do with herself. A knock at her door resolved the question. A young maid stood outside, looking nervous but determined to be polite. "Lady Grishka, Master Benedict asked that you be given the option to attend the wedding ceremony if you feel well enough. He says you are welcome in the gallery with the other honored guests, or you may remain here if you prefer to rest further." Grishka considered declining. Weddings were for families and friends, and she was neither to this household. But curiosity tugged at her, along with a strange desire to see more of this Benedict Rothwell who had shown her such unexpected kindness. "I will attend," she said. The maid led her through the manor to a gallery overlooking the great hall, where chairs had been arranged for guests to watch the ceremony below. Other nobles were already gathering, dressed in their finest clothes, and Grishka felt their stares as she entered. Her green skin marked her immediately as different as other, and the whispers started up like flies buzzing around carrion. "Is that an orc?" What is it doing here? Surely she cannot be a guest. Some new kind of entertainment. Grishka held her head high and took a seat in the back corner, determined not to give them the satisfaction of seeing her discomfort. She had faced worse than whispers in her life. Battle, loss, the destruction of her clan. She could handle the disdain of perfumed nobles. The ceremony began with appropriate pageantry. Benedict entered from one side of the hall, looking solemn and handsome in his formal attire, and took his place before the priest. Then the bride entered, a beautiful human woman with golden hair and a dress that probably cost more than most families earned in a year. Lady Veronica Brightmere, Grishka had heard the servants call her, daughter of a powerful duke and a strategic match for House Rothwell. The ceremony proceeded according to human tradition, with prayers and vows and the exchange of rings. Grishka watched Benedict's face, trying to read his expression. He said his vows clearly and firmly, but there was something in his eyes that gave her pause. Not joy exactly, though he did not look unhappy either. More like determination, or perhaps resignation. This was a duty he was fulfilling, she realized, not a love match but a political alliance. It reminded her painfully of her own situation. She too had been offered up for political purposes, sent to live among strangers as part of a treaty she had no say in creating. At least, Benedict had some choice in his fate. She had simply been informed one day that she would leave her homeland and serve in the house of her people's former enemies. The ceremony concluded with a kiss, and the hall erupted in applause. Musicians struck up a celebration, and servants began bringing out the feast that the kitchen staff had spent days preparing. The guests in the gallery rose to make their way down to the great hall for the reception, and Grishka hung back, unsure whether she was expected to attend, or if her invitation had only extended to the ceremony itself. Lady Grishka. She turned to find Benedict standing at the gallery entrance. He must have slipped away from the receiving line below to come find her. Up close, she could see the careful control in his expression, the way he held tension in his shoulders. "I wanted to thank you for attending," he said. "I know it cannot have been comfortable with all those stares and whispers." "I have faced worse," Grishka said honestly. "You had no obligation to invite me. Yesterday I was scrubbing your pots. Yesterday you were being treated dishonorably by my household, and that is not something I take lightly." Benedict glanced back toward the great hall, where his new bride would be expecting him. "I must return to my duties as host, but I wanted to ask if you would consider attending the feast as well. I understand if you prefer solitude, but you have as much right to be there as any other guest. Your bride might not appreciate an orc at her wedding feast," Grishka pointed out. A flicker of something, frustration perhaps, crossed Benedict's face. "Veronica and I have an understanding about many things. She knew when she agreed to this marriage that I take my responsibilities seriously, including honoring treaties with orc clans." He paused, then added more quietly, "I would consider it a personal favor if you attended. It would send a message to the other nobles that House Rothwell keeps its word and treats all treaty partners with respect." So she would be a political statement, Grishka thought. Still, that was more dignity than scrubbing pots, and Benedict had at least been honest about his reasons. "Very well," she said. "I will attend for a short while." Relief crossed his face, genuine and unguarded, and he bowed to her again before hurrying back down to the great hall. That bow, Grishka thought, was becoming a dangerous thing to her equilibrium. Every time he did it, she felt something shift inside her chest, some hard defensive wall cracking just slightly. The feast was as lavish as expected, with musicians playing and wine flowing freely. Grishka took a seat at one of the lower tables, far from the head table where Benedict and Veronica held court. She picked at the food, which was excellent after years of military rations, and watched the human nobles dance and celebrate. Several times throughout the evening, she noticed Benedict's gaze finding her across the crowded hall. Each time, he would nod slightly, as if confirming she was still there, still being treated properly. His bride noticed eventually, following his line of sight to where Grishka sat, and her expression cooled considerably. Lady Veronica leaned close to Benedict and said something that made his jaw tighten, but he shook his head in response and said something back that made her press her lips into a thin line. Grishka decided she had made her political statement and rose to leave before she caused any more tension on the man's wedding day. But as she was making her way toward the exit, a drunk noble stumbled into her path. "Well, well," he slurred, his breath reeking of wine. "The monster cleans up better than I expected. Tell me, beast, do you actually understand what people are saying, or do you just grunt and follow orders?" Several other nobles had turned to watch, and Grishka felt the familiar heat of anger rising in her chest. She could break this fool in half without much effort, but that would only prove every terrible thing they believed about orcs. "Excuse me," she said with careful control. "I was just leaving." The drunk noble grabbed her arm. "I asked you a question, monster. Do you have any manners, or are orcs too stupid to remove your hand?" The voice was cold and sharp as winter ice, and the drunk noble froze. Benedict had appeared beside them with the quiet speed of a trained fighter, his gray eyes blazing with controlled fury. "Remove your hand from my guest immediately, Lord Pemberton, or I will remove it for you." The drunk noble paled and snatched his hand back as if Grishka's arm had burned him. "Master Benedict, I meant no offense. You were harassing a guest under my family's protection at my wedding feast," Benedict said, his voice still dangerously calm. "I suggest you leave now before I decide that the alliance with your father is not worth tolerating your presence." Lord Pemberton fled, nearly tripping over his own feet in his haste, and the other nobles who had been watching suddenly found other places to be. Benedict turned to Grishka, his expression softening immediately. "Are you hurt?" "No," Grishka said, still processing how quickly he had moved to defend her. "I can handle drunken fools. You did not need to." "Yes, I did," Benedict interrupted. "You are here under treaty protections and as my personal guest. Anyone who insults you insults House Rothwell." He seemed to realize he was still standing very close to her and took a small step back. "I apologize that you had to deal with that stupidity." "Why do you keep apologizing for your people?" Grishka asked, genuinely curious now. "Most humans would simply shrug and say orcs should expect such treatment." Benedict was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "I spent 2 years fighting on the borderlands," he said finally. "I saw orcs kill my friends, and I killed orcs in return. It was brutal and ugly, and both sides committed atrocities in the name of survival." He focused on her again, his eyes shadowed with old pain. "When the treaty was finally signed, I thought about all that death and realized it had been pointless. We fought because we feared each other, because we believed the other side was monstrous and savage. But in the end, we were all just people trying to protect our families and our land." "Not all humans see it that way," Grishka said quietly. "No," Benedict agreed. "But I am the lord of this estate now, and I can at least control how people are treated under my roof." He glanced back toward the head table, where Veronica was watching them with obvious displeasure. "I should return to my bride. Will you be all right?" "I will retire to my room," Grishka said. "Thank you for the feast, and congratulations on your marriage." Something complicated crossed Benedict's face at that, but he simply nodded and bowed to her one more time before returning to his duties. Grishka slipped out of the great hall and made her way back through the manor's winding corridors, her mind churning with confusion and emotions she could not quite name. She had expected to hate all humans, to endure her time here as a prisoner counting the days until her treaty obligation ended. But Benedict Rothwell had complicated that simple narrative. He had shown her kindness and respect when he had no reason to, defended her honor in front of his peers, and spoken to her as an equal rather than a monster. It was unsettling and strange, and it made her wonder what else she might have been wrong about. The next few weeks passed in an odd limbo. Benedict was occupied with his new bride and the responsibilities of taking over his father's estate, so Grishka saw him only occasionally in passing. When their paths did cross, he always acknowledged her with that same respectful bow and asked after her well-being, but he never had time for the longer conversation he had mentioned. Meanwhile, Grishka existed in a strange space between servant and guest. The other servants no longer ordered her to scrub pots, but neither did they quite know what to do with her. The noble guests who had attended the wedding had mostly departed, leaving only the household residents, and they gave her a wide berth. She took meals in her room, spent hours reading in the estate's library, and tried to figure out what exactly her role was supposed to be. She also could not help noticing that Benedict's marriage seemed strained. The few times she saw Benedict and Veronica together, they maintained polite formality but no warmth. Veronica spent most of her time in her own chambers, or socializing with the few noble ladies who remained as guests, while Benedict threw himself into estate business with the dedication of a man trying to stay busy. One morning about a month after the wedding, Grishka was walking in the estate gardens, one of the few places where she felt comfortable spending time. The late autumn air was crisp, and the leaves were turning brilliant colors. She was admiring a particularly beautiful tree when she heard footsteps on the gravel path behind her. Lady Grishka. She turned to find Benedict approaching, looking tired but pleased to see her. He was dressed for riding, with mud on his boots suggesting he had just returned from inspecting the outer lands. "Master Benedict," she said, inclining her head in greeting. "Just Benedict, please," he said. "I feel like we should be past such formality given that I found you with your hands in my dishwater." There was humor in his tone, and Grishka felt her lips twitch in what might have been a smile. "Then you should call me Grishka, not my lady. I am no noblewoman." "You are the daughter of a clan chief, educated and sent here as a diplomatic representative," Benedict countered. "That makes you a noblewoman by any reasonable definition." He gestured to a nearby bench. "May I join you? I have been meaning to speak with you properly for weeks, but running this estate takes more time than I anticipated." They sat, and for a moment neither spoke, just enjoying the peaceful garden and the autumn breeze. Finally, Benedict said, "I wanted to ask how you have been settling in. I know your situation here is complicated, and I want to make sure your time with us is as comfortable as possible." "Comfortable is a relative term," Grishka said carefully. "I have a nice room and good food, which is more than I expected, but I am also isolated and without clear purpose. The servants do not know how to treat me, and the few nobles who remain regard me as a curiosity at best." Benedict nodded slowly. "I have been thinking about that. The treaty said you were to serve as a cultural liaison and companion, but we never established what that would actually mean in practice." He turned to face her more directly. "What did your clan intend when they sent you here?" Grishka considered her words. "They hoped I would help your people understand that orcs are not simply monsters, that we have culture, honor, and intelligence. They taught me your language and customs so I could build bridges between our peoples." She laughed bitterly. "Though I suspect they also hope to keep me safe." As the chief's daughter, I was valuable to enemies. Here, hidden among humans and protected by treaty, I was supposed to be secure. And instead you spent 3 days scrubbing pots in chains, Benedict said grimly. I am still furious about that. He was quiet for a moment, then asked, What would you like to do? If you could design your own role here, what would give your life purpose? The question surprised Grishka. No one had asked her what she wanted in years. I am educated, she said slowly. I could teach, perhaps. Share orc language and customs with any who wish to learn. I am also skilled in combat, trained since childhood. I could provide another perspective on defense and strategy. Could you train others in orc fighting techniques? Benedict asked, his interest clearly piqued. We have guards and soldiers, but they only know human combat styles. Understanding how your people fight could be valuable, both for defense and for helping our soldiers see orcs as skilled warriors rather than mindless brutes. It was a clever idea, Grishka admitted to herself. Combat was a universal language, and warriors respected skill regardless of race. I could do that, she agreed, if your guards would be willing to learn from an orc. They will be willing if I tell them to be, Benedict said with quiet authority, and I think some would be genuinely interested. I have several veterans who fought on the borderlands and came away with respect for orc warriors, even though we were enemies. They talked for another hour, planning out what Grishka's role might look like. Benedict had ideas about having her teach orc language to the household, advise on trade relationships with orc clans, and help interpret treaties and agreements. Grishka found herself getting caught up in his enthusiasm, in the idea that she might actually do something meaningful here rather than simply existing in limbo. As the sun climbed higher, Benedict reluctantly stood. I need to get back to work, but I am glad we finally had this conversation. I will make the arrangements and let you know when we can start the training sessions. Benedict, Grishka said, stopping him before he could leave. Why are you doing this? Really? You could have left me in the kitchens and no one would have questioned it. You could keep me isolated as a token gesture to the treaty. Why are you going out of your way to give me purpose? Benedict looked at her for a long moment, his gray eyes serious. Because I do not want the kind of peace where we simply stop killing each other while still hating each other. I want the kind of peace where humans and orcs can see each other as people, as potential friends and allies. He smiled slightly. And because you seem intelligent and capable, and it would be a waste for you to spend your time in idleness when you could be making a real difference. After he left, Grishka sat in the garden for a long time, turning his words over in her mind. She was beginning to understand that Benedict Rothwell was an idealist, someone who genuinely believed in the possibility of change and was willing to work for it. It was an attractive quality, she admitted to herself, perhaps more attractive than was wise given their respective positions. The combat training sessions began the following week and proved to be both challenging and rewarding. Benedict had selected a dozen guards and soldiers, a mix of veterans and younger fighters, and Grishka taught them the fundamentals of orc combat. The emphasis on using superior strength efficiently, the grappling techniques orcs favored, the way her people fought in tight formations. The human fighters were skeptical at first, but when Grishka demonstrated by putting 2 of the larger guards on their backs in quick succession, skepticism turned to respect. Benedict himself attended many of the sessions, training alongside his men rather than simply observing. Grishka found herself enjoying the challenge of sparring with him. He was skilled, clearly well-trained, and he adapted quickly to the new techniques she showed him. More than that, he fought with respect, never treating her as a monster or enemy but as an equal opponent. They developed a rhythm over those autumn weeks. Training in the mornings, then Grishka would teach language lessons in the afternoon to any household members who were interested. Benedict attended those as well when his duties permitted, and Grishka found herself looking forward to seeing him struggle with the guttural sounds of orcish words. His face screwed up in concentration as he tried to master the pronunciation. "Your people have too many growling sounds," he complained good-naturedly one afternoon after repeatedly failing to properly say the word for honor. "Your people have too many whistling sounds," Grishka shot back. "Half your words sound like birdsong." The other students laughed, and Grishka realized with some surprise that she had made something like a joke. When had she become comfortable enough here to joke? But beneath the growing comfort and routine, Grishka could not ignore certain complications. She was increasingly aware of Benedict as more than just a kind lord who had shown her respect. She noticed the way his gray eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, the strength in his hands, the dedication he brought to everything he did. She found herself looking for him in the halls, her heart lifting when she heard his voice. It was foolish and dangerous. He was a married human lord, and she was an orc woman living in his household under treaty obligations. Nothing could come of these feelings except pain. Yet they grew anyway, stubborn and unwanted, like weeds in a garden. She also noticed that Benedict seemed to be spending more time around her and less with his wife. Veronica had apparently decided that running the household was beneath her, preferring to spend her days socializing and planning visits to her father's estate. The few times Grishka saw them together, Veronica was either complaining about something or ignoring Benedict entirely, while he maintained patient courtesy that seemed increasingly strained. The first snow of winter came in late November, blanketing the estate in white. Grishka stood at her window watching it fall and feeling a deep ache of homesickness. Snow meant something different to orcs, reminded her of celebrations and gathering times in her clan, of her mother's voice singing traditional songs around the fire. A knock at her door pulled her from the melancholy. When she opened it, Benedict stood there holding a thick cloak. "I thought you might like to walk in the snow," he said. "If I recall correctly from my reading, orcs have winter celebrations around the first snow. I thought you might be feeling far from home." The fact that he had remembered that he had thought about her feelings made Grishka's throat tight. "That is kind of you," she managed. They walked through the snow-covered gardens bundled in warm cloaks, their breath puffing white in the cold air. Benedict asked her about orc winter traditions, and Grishka found herself telling him stories from her childhood. The great hunts, the song competitions, the way her people would build massive bonfires and dance around them until dawn. "It sounds beautiful," Benedict said quietly. "Nothing like the savage rituals human scholars claim orcs perform." "Your scholars do not know much about my people," Grishka said. "They would rather write dramatic nonsense than seek the truth." "I would like to change that," Benedict said. "I have been thinking about writing to some of the universities, suggesting they send scholars here to actually study orc culture properly. With your help translating and explaining, we could produce accurate texts instead of fearful fantasies." It was exactly the kind of idealistic plan she had come to expect from him, and exactly the kind of thing that made her heart ache with feelings she should not have. They walked in companionable silence for a while, and then Benedict said, "May I ask you something personal?" "You may ask." "I may not answer." He smiled at that. "Fair enough. I have been wondering why you have not fought harder against your situation here. You are clearly strong enough to escape if you wanted to, skilled enough to make it through the borderlands. Yet you have stayed and accepted a role in my household." "Why?" Grishka thought about it as they walked. "Several reasons," she said finally. Running would dishonor my clan and potentially void the treaty that is keeping my people safe. It would confirm every terrible thing humans believe about orcs being untrustworthy savages. She paused. And truthfully, I am finding that not all humans are as bad as I believed. Some are even worth staying for. She had not meant to say that last part, but it slipped out anyway. Benedict stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression complex and unreadable in the falling snow. "Grishka," he started, then stopped and shook his head. I should not. Whatever he was going to say was interrupted by a servant running toward them through the snow, calling Benedict's name urgently. "Master Benedict, Lady Veronica has taken ill. The physician asks that you come immediately." Benedict's face went pale, and he ran back toward the manor without another word. Grishka followed more slowly, her brief moment of connection shattered by the reminder that Benedict had a wife, and that wife had the rightful claim on his attention and concern. Veronica's illness turned out to be relatively minor, a winter cold that the physician treated with hot drinks and bed rest. But the incident reminded Grishka of the reality of her situation. She was growing far too attached to a man who was not and could never be hers. It was time to establish better boundaries, to remember her place. She started taking her meals in her room again and finding excuses to skip training sessions. When Benedict sought her out to ask why she was avoiding him, she claimed to be busy with other tasks or feeling unwell. It was cowardly, but she did not trust herself to be around him without her feelings showing too clearly. December brought harder snows and shorter days. Grishka spent long hours alone, reading or staring out her window at the white landscape, fighting the dual battles of homesickness and heartbreak. The isolation was easier than seeing Benedict and wanting what she could not have. But Benedict, stubborn and perceptive, would not let her hide forever. One evening in mid-December, he came to her room with a tray of food and a determined expression. "You have been avoiding me for 2 weeks," he said without preamble, "and I want to know why." "I have not been avoiding you," Grishka lied. "I have simply been busy." "Grishka, please. I thought we had become friends. If I have done something to offend you, I need to know so I can make it right." "Friends." The word twisted in her chest like a knife. "You have done nothing wrong," she said tiredly. "I just think it is better if we maintain more appropriate distance. You are the lord here. I am a treaty obligation. We should not have been spending so much time together." Benedict set the tray down and closed the door, giving them privacy. "Is this about what I almost said in the garden, before Veronica took ill?" "What you almost said does not matter," Grishka said firmly. "You are married. You have duties and responsibilities. So do I. We should both remember that." "My marriage," Benedict said slowly, "is not what I thought it would be. That is not my concern. Grishka, please just listen." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Veronica and I have an arrangement. She married me for my title and connections. I married her for the alliance with her father. We have been honest with each other about this from the beginning. She has made it very clear that she intends to maintain her own separate life, visiting her family frequently and pursuing her own interests." "That does not change anything," Grishka said, though her heart was beating faster. "You are still married. I am still an orc living in your household. Even if your marriage is political, anything between us would be scandal and dishonor." "I know," Benedict said, and there was real pain in his voice. "I know all the logical, sensible reasons why I should not feel this way. But Grishka, I cannot stop thinking about you. You are intelligent, strong, honorable, and being around you makes me feel more alive than I have felt in years. These past 2 weeks without you have been miserable." Grishka closed her eyes, trying to maintain her resolve even as her heart sang at his words. "What would you have me do, Benedict? Become your mistress?" hidden away and shamed while you maintain your respectable human marriage. I have more pride than that. No, gods no, I would never ask that of you, Benedict said quickly. He came closer, his voice dropping to something softer, more vulnerable. I do not have answers, Grishka. I just know that meeting you, knowing you, has changed everything for me. I cannot go back to pretending I do not feel this way. Then you will have to learn, Grishka said, even as every part of her wanted to close the distance between them and damn the consequences. Because this cannot happen, Benedict. It would destroy you, give your enemies ammunition, possibly even void the treaty that protects my clan. Whatever you feel, whatever I might feel, it does not matter against those realities. Benedict looked like she had struck him, but he nodded slowly. You are right. Of course you are right. I apologize for putting you in this position. He moved to the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. For what it is worth, I think in a different world, in different circumstances, we could have had something extraordinary. After he left, Grishka sat on her bed and let herself cry for the first time since coming to this place. She cried for her lost home, for the impossible situation she found herself in, and for the man she was falling in love with but could never have. The midwinter festival came and went in a blur of activity. The estate hosted a large celebration, and Grishka was expected to attend as part of her cultural liaison role. She watched Benedict dance with Veronica and other noble ladies, watched him fulfill all his social obligations with practiced grace, and maintained her own careful distance. When drunk nobles asked her to demonstrate orc dances or tell savage stories, she complied with dignity, using it as an opportunity to educate rather than just entertain. Benedict's eyes found hers often across the crowded hall, full of longing and regret. Each time, Grishka looked away. This was the right choice, the only choice, even if it felt like slowly tearing her heart in half. January brought bitter cold and unexpected news. A messenger arrived from the borderlands with reports that several human settlements had been raided, and the raiders had left orc weapons behind. Tensions were rising, with some human lords calling for retaliation and void the treaty entirely. Benedict called an emergency meeting of his advisors, and he asked Grishka to attend. She entered the council room feeling the weight of hostile stares from the assembled nobles, but Benedict gestured her to a seat near his own. Lady Grishka is here as an expert on orc culture and tactics, he said firmly. Her insights will be valuable as we determine how to respond to these attacks. One of the advisors, an older lord named Randolph, slammed his hand on the table. An orc advising us on how to respond to orc attacks. That is madness, Benedict. How do we know she is not part of this plot? Because I have been living in your manor for 4 months under constant observation, Grishka said coolly. And because I have more to lose than anyone if this treaty falls apart. My entire clan's safety depends on maintaining peace with your people. She has a point, another advisor admitted grudgingly. What can you tell us about these raids, Lady Grishka? Are they sanctioned by the treaty clans, or is this the work of rogue groups? Grishka studied the reports, noting details about the timing, targets, and methods. These attacks are strange, she said slowly. The weapons used are ceremonial styles that no war clan would actually carry into battle. The timing is wrong for traditional raiding season, and the targets seem chosen to cause maximum political damage rather than strategic value. What are you suggesting? Benedict asked, leaning forward intently. I am suggesting that these raids may not be what they appear, Grishka said carefully. If someone wanted to restart the war between humans and orcs, staging false attacks using ceremonial weapons would be an effective strategy. The room erupted in argument, with some advisors dismissing her theory as orc trickery and others admitting it had merit. Benedict listened to all sides, then made his decision. "We will send scouts to investigate further before taking any retaliatory action," he announced. "And I will personally visit the sites of the attacks to assess the situation. If Lady Grishka is correct and someone is trying to sabotage the peace, we need proof before we start a war based on lies." After the meeting, Benedict asked Grishka to remain behind. Once they were alone, he said, "I want you to come with me to investigate these attacks. Your knowledge could be crucial to determining the truth." "That could be dangerous," Grishka pointed out. "If we encounter real orc raiders, they will see me as a traitor for traveling with humans. And if we encounter humans who want war, I would be an easy target." "I will protect you," Benedict said with quiet intensity. "I swear it on my family's honor, but I need your help, Grishka. Too many lives depend on getting this right." So Grishka found herself preparing to travel into the borderlands in the dead of winter, accompanying Benedict and a small group of his most trusted guards. Veronica was loudly unhappy about her husband risking himself on what she called a fool's errand, but Benedict was unmoved. They set out on a gray morning, horses picking their way carefully through snow-covered trails. Grishka rode beside Benedict, and despite everything that had been said between them, despite all the reasons they needed to maintain distance, it felt right to be at his side. They talked as they traveled, sometimes about the investigation, sometimes about other things. Benedict told her about his childhood, his complicated relationship with his late father, his dreams for what his estate could become. Grishka shared stories of her own upbringing, the pressures of being a clan chief's daughter, the battle training that had started before she could barely walk. "You ever regret the life you did not get to choose?" Benedict asked one night as they camped in a sheltered hollow. The guards were maintaining a perimeter, giving them relative privacy by the fire. "All the time," Grishka admitted. "I was supposed to be a warrior, maybe eventually a war leader. Instead, I am a political pawn sent to live among people who see me as a monster." She poked at the fire with a stick. "But then I think about what my life would have been if the war had continued. More death, more hatred, and probably an early grave. At least this way, my existence serves some purpose beyond killing." "You are far more than a political pawn," Benedict said softly. "You are the bravest person I have ever met, human or orc." Their eyes met across the fire, and Grishka felt all her careful resolutions crumbling. Out here in the wilderness, away from the manor and its social constraints, it was too easy to pretend they were just two people drawn to each other, not a human lord and an orc treaty obligation with everything stacked against them. Benedict seemed to feel it too, because he stood abruptly. "I should check on the guards," he said, and fled into the darkness before Grishka could respond. They reached the first attacked settlement 2 days later. The village had been partially burned, with several homes destroyed and supplies stolen. The survivors told stories of orcs attacking in the night, but when Grishka examined the scene, she found more evidence that something was wrong. The tracks were odd, too uniform, as if the raiders had been trying to make clear orc-style prints. The weapons left behind were ceremonial pieces, valuable and distinctive, exactly the kind of thing real raiders would have taken as loot. "This was staged," Grishka told Benedict as they examined a broken spear left prominently in the village square. "Everything about this is meant to look like an orc raid to someone who does not know better, but the details are wrong." They visited 2 more attack sites and found the same pattern. Benedict's guards, several of whom were veterans of the border wars, began to agree with Grishka's assessment. Someone was definitely trying to restart the war, and doing a clumsy job of it. The question was who, And that answer came in the form of an ambush on their way back to the estate. They were riding through a narrow pass when arrows began falling from the ridge above. Benedict's guards immediately moved to protect him, but several were wounded in the first volley. Grishka pulled Benedict from his horse and into cover behind some rocks as more arrows rained down. "We are pinned," one of the guards shouted. "We need to retreat or we will be picked off." But retreating would mean leaving wounded men behind, and Grishka could see from Benedict's face that he would not accept that. So she made a decision. Before Benedict could stop her, she stood up from cover and roared a challenge in the orcish language, her voice carrying through the pass like a battle horn. The arrows stopped, and there was a moment of confused silence. Then figures emerged on the ridge above, and Grishka's blood ran cold. They were humans dressed in stolen orc armor, carrying orc weapons, their faces painted in crude approximations of orc war markings. "Show yourselves," Grishka called out in the human tongue. "You are not orcs, just cowards playing at being warriors." One of the false orcs, apparently the leader, laughed. "Clever beast, figured it out, did you? Shame you will not live to tell anyone. Our employers paid good coin to restart this war, and a real orc dying with the evidence will sell the story nicely." Mercenaries, Grishka realized. Someone wealthy had hired human mercenaries to stage orc raids and frame her people. Before she could process the implications, the mercenaries started moving down the ridge toward them, and Benedict was pulling her back into cover. "You should not have revealed yourself," he said, but there was admiration in his eyes along with the fear. "Now they will focus on you. Better me than your men," Grishka said. She checked the knife at her belt, her only weapon. "Benedict, if we do not survive this, you need to know that these past months have meant everything to me. You treated me like a person when no one else would, and I, Benedict, kissed her." It was desperate and fierce, and Grishka kissed him back with all the longing she had been suppressing for weeks. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Benedict said, "We are surviving this, both of us. And then we are going to figure out how to make this work because I refuse to lose you." The mercenaries were almost upon them when the sound of hoofbeats echoed through the pass. Reinforcements, Grishka thought with relief. Benedict's guards from the estate must have followed them. But the riders who appeared were not human guards. They were orcs, 24 warriors in full battle gear, and leading them was someone Grishka recognized with shock. Her brother, Kargath, who should have been hundreds of miles away with their clan. The mercenaries saw the orc war party and fled back up the ridge, abandoning their ambush. Kargath rode up to where Grishka and Benedict crouched behind the rocks, and he looked down at his sister with an expression that mixed relief and exasperation. "Grishka," he said in Orcish, "when you miss your monthly report, we worry. When 3 months pass with no word, we assume you are dead or captured, and we come to rescue you. Imagine my surprise to find you playing investigator with human soldiers." "I can explain," Grishka started, switching to Orcish as well. "You had better," Kargath said, but his tusked grin was affectionate. "And you can start by explaining why you smell like that human lord and why his scent is all over you." Grishka felt her green skin somehow darken with embarrassment, an orc blush. Beside her, Benedict was trying to follow the conversation with his limited understanding of the orcish tongue, clearly catching enough to be concerned. "It is complicated," Grishka said. "It always is with you, sister," Kargath replied. He looked at Benedict and switched to heavily accented but clear human speech. "You are Lord Rothwell, the one who holds my sister under treaty." "I am," Benedict said, standing and facing the orc warrior with admirable composure despite being outnumbered and unarmed. "Your sister has been treated with honor, I swear it. She is a valued guest and advisor in my household." Kargath studied him for a long moment, then said something in Orcish that made several of his warriors laugh. To Benedict, he said, "My warriors and I will help you chase these false raiders. Then we will come to your estate and discuss the situation properly. My sister has much to explain to both our peoples, I think." The combined force of orcs and humans made short work of hunting down the mercenaries. Most fled, but they captured several and found documents proving they had been hired by a group of human nobles who wanted to restart the war for profit. With testimony and evidence secured, Benedict and Grishka rode back to the estate with Kargath's warriors as unlikely escorts. The arrival of 24 armed orcs at House Rothwell's gates caused predictable panic. Servants fled, guards scrambled to defensive positions, and Veronica emerged from the manor demanding to know why her husband had brought monsters to their home. Benedict, exhausted and filthy from travel but still commanding, gathered everyone in the great hall and explained everything. The false raids, the mercenary conspiracy, how Grishka's expertise had uncovered the plot, and how her brother's timely arrival had helped them capture the proof they needed. "These orc warriors are here as honored guests," Benedict announced. "They helped prevent a war that would have cost countless lives on both sides. We will treat them with the respect due to allies." Veronica was furious, but she could not argue with the evidence or Benedict's authority. The household scrambled to accommodate the unexpected guests, and that night the great hall hosted a feast unlike any the region had ever seen. Humans and orcs dining together, sharing food and stories, beginning to see each other as something other than monsters. Grishka sat between Benedict and her brother, translating conversations and watching the beginning of something that might eventually become real peace. Kargath told embarrassing stories from her childhood, making Benedict laugh in a way she had rarely seen. Benedict shared his plans for increasing trade and cooperation between their peoples, and Kargath listened with genuine interest. As the night wore on and wine flowed freely, Kargath leaned close to Grishka and said quietly in Orcish, "He is a good man, you're human. I see why you have chosen him." "I have not chosen anything," Grishka protested. "It is impossible, Kargath. He is married, I am a treaty obligation, there are too many barriers." "Then remove the barriers," Kargath said simply. "You are the chief's daughter. If you say this human is worthy, the clan will accept him." As for his marriage to the sharp-voiced woman, he shrugged. "That is a human problem for him to solve. But sister, I have never seen you look at anyone the way you look at him. Life is too short to deny what you want." Before Grishka could respond, Benedict stood to make an announcement. The hall fell silent, and Grishka felt her heart start to race as he began to speak. "These past months have taught me many things," Benedict said, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. "I have learned that the peace treaty between our peoples is more than just words on paper. It requires work, understanding, and the courage to challenge our own prejudices. Lady Grishka has been instrumental in that education, and I owe her a debt I can never fully repay." He turned to look directly at her, and Grishka saw determination in his gray eyes. "I have also learned that sometimes what we think we want and what we actually need are very different things. I entered into my marriage believing it would secure peace and strengthen alliances. But a marriage without respect or affection secures nothing in the end." Veronica stood up, her face pale with fury. "Benedict, what are you saying?" "I am saying that I am formally requesting an annulment of our marriage," Benedict said, his voice steady despite the gasps that rippled through the hall. "I will provide you with full financial compensation beyond what our marriage contract requires, and I will maintain the alliance with your father through other diplomatic means. but I will not continue a false marriage when my heart belongs elsewhere." The hall erupted in shocked conversation. Veronica stormed out, followed by her ladies. Several of Benedict's advisors looked horrified, while others seemed intrigued. Kargath was grinning broadly and slapped his knee in approval. Benedict walked over to where Grishka sat, frozen in shock, and knelt before her as he had that first day in the kitchen. "Lady Grishka of the Stonefist clan," he said formally, "I am asking if you would consider a courtship between us. I know I am asking you to accept scandal and difficulty. I know many will oppose this match, but I swear to you that I will spend every day earning the gift of your affection and fighting for the kind of peace where humans and orcs can build lives together without shame." Grishka found her voice, though it shook. "Benedict, you are giving up so much. Your reputation, your easy alliances, the approval of your peers. Are you certain this is what you want?" "I have never been more certain of anything," Benedict said. "You are what I want. A future where we can build something real together is what I want, if you will have me." Grishka looked at her brother, who nodded encouragement. She looked at the assembled crowd, seeing some faces hostile but others curious or even supportive. Then she looked back at Benedict, this human man who had shown her respect when no one else would, who had defended her honor and valued her mind, who had somehow found his way past all her defenses to her heart. "Yes," she said, "I will court you, Benedict Rothwell. And together we will show both our peoples what is possible when we choose love over fear." Benedict stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her in front of everyone while the orcs cheered and the humans murmured in shock. It was scandalous and unprecedented and perfect. The next months were difficult, just as Benedict had warned. Veronica's father initially threatened to break their alliance, though he eventually accepted substantial financial compensation and agreements that actually strengthened trade relationships. Some nobles refused to associate with Benedict anymore, but others, particularly younger ones and veterans of the border wars, saw the potential in what he was trying to build. The church, after much debate, agreed to annul Benedict's marriage on the grounds that it had never been consummated and had been entered into under false pretenses by both parties. Veronica, it turned out, had her own lover she had been forced to abandon for the political marriage, so she was ultimately happy to be free as well. Through it all, Grishka and Benedict navigated their courtship with the knowledge that they were setting precedent for something larger than themselves. They maintained propriety, knowing that any scandal would reflect on not just them but all possibility of human-orc relationships. Kargath stayed at the estate for several weeks, his presence providing legitimacy to the courtship from the orc side. Spring came, bringing with it new growth and new possibilities. Benedict and Grishka walked often in the gardens where they had first admitted their feelings, planning not just their own future but broader initiatives to increase cooperation between their peoples. Benedict established a formal cultural exchange program, bringing young orcs to live and work on human estates, while human youths did the same in orc territories. Grishka's combat training program expanded, and she began training both human and orc warriors together, breaking down barriers through shared sweat and challenge. On a warm day in late April, nearly a year after Grishka's arrival at the estate, Benedict proposed properly. He took her to a hilltop overlooking both his lands and the distant orc territories, and he offered her a ring that had been specially made. Silver and iron intertwined, human and orc metallurgy combined into something stronger than either alone. "Marry me," he said simply. "Let us build the future we both want together." Grishka took the ring and slipped it on her finger, this symbol of two peoples joined. "Yes," she said, "always yes." The wedding, when it happened 2 months later, was a celebration that brought together both their peoples. It was held outdoors in a clearing on the border between human and orc lands. Human priests and orc shamans officiated together, blessing the union according to both traditions. Grishka wore green silk that complemented her skin, with flowers woven through her dark hair. Benedict wore formal attire that incorporated orc patterns in the embroidery, a visible symbol of his commitment to bringing their cultures together. Kargath gave Grishka away, and Benedict's closest friend from his military service stood as his attendant. When they exchanged vows, speaking first in the human tongue and then in Orcish, there was hardly a dry eye among the assembled guests. The feast afterward was a raucous affair with both human and orc dishes, music from both cultures, and dancing that lasted until dawn. As the celebration continued, Benedict pulled Grishka aside to a quiet spot away from the crowd. They stood together watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, and Benedict wrapped his arms around her from behind, tucking his chin over her shoulder. "You have any regrets?" he asked softly. Grishka leaned back against him, feeling safe and loved and home in a way she never had before. "Not a single one. You bowed to me when I was scrubbing pots and called me my lady when no one else would. You saw me when everyone else saw only a monster. How could I regret finding you? I saw you because you are impossible to miss," Benedict said. "Strong and beautiful and brave. I was the lucky one, Grishka. You could have turned away from me 100 times and you chose to stay." "We chose each other," Grishka corrected. "Against all odds and wisdom, we chose love. And we will keep choosing it every day until we have built the world we want to live in." They stood there as night fell and stars emerged. Two people from different worlds who had found something that transcended the boundaries their peoples had tried to build. Around them, humans and orcs celebrated together, and in that celebration was the seed of real peace, the kind that grew from friendship and respect rather than just exhausted hatred. In the years that followed, Benedict and Grishka became known throughout the borderlands as the lord and lady who had bridged two peoples. Their estate became a model for integration and cooperation, and other human nobles slowly began to follow their example. The cultural exchange programs expanded, trade routes opened up, and mixed communities began to form where humans and orcs lived side by side. It was not always easy. There was still prejudice to overcome, still those who clung to old hatreds and fears. But Benedict and Grishka faced each challenge together, their partnership stronger than anything that tried to break it. They raised children who were taught to value both their heritages, human and orc alike, and those children grew up to be bridges themselves, carrying forward their parents' vision of peace. When historians later wrote about the period, they marked Benedict and Grishka's marriage as a turning point, the moment when real peace became possible. But for Benedict and Grishka themselves, the politics and historical significance mattered less than the simple truth of their daily life together. The quiet mornings sharing tea before the day's work began, the sparring matches in the training yard that still made them both laugh, the evenings spent planning and dreaming about the future, and the nights when they held each other close and marveled that they had found this love despite everything that tried to keep them apart. Grishka never forgot that first moment in the kitchen when Benedict had bowed to her and called her my lady. It had been the first crack in the wall of prejudice and fear that separated their peoples, the first glimpse of the possibility that someone might see past her green skin and tusks to the person beneath. That simple act of respect had changed everything, had set them both on a path neither could have imagined. And Benedict never forgot the way Grishka had looked at him that day, the surprise and hope in her eyes, the way she had stood tall despite the dishwater and chains. He had seen her strength immediately, her dignity even in the worst circumstances, and he had known instinctively that she was someone extraordinary. They had been tested by circumstance, by prejudice, by duty and politics, and all the forces that tried to keep them apart. But they had chosen each other again and again, and in that choosing, they had built something beautiful and lasting. Their love was proof that understanding could overcome hatred, that courage could break down barriers, and that sometimes the most powerful alliances were the ones forged not in throne rooms and council chambers, but in the quiet moments between two people who saw each other truly and chose to stay. As they grew old together, their estate thriving around them and their children carrying forward their work, Benedict and Grishka would sometimes walk through those gardens where they had first admitted their feelings. They would remember the uncertainty and fear of those early days, the impossible odds they had faced, and they would marvel at how far they had come. "Everyone mistook you for a kitchen servant," Benedict would say, shaking his head. "They saw you scrubbing pots and chains and never looked deeper." "But you looked deeper," Grishka would reply, taking his hand. "You bowed and called me my lady when I was at my lowest. You gave me back my dignity when everyone else had tried to strip it away. That is why I love you, Benedict Rothwell. Not just for the grand gestures or the political courage, but for that first moment of basic human decency when you saw me as a person worth respecting." And Benedict would kiss her then, this remarkable woman who had turned his entire world upside down and made it infinitely better. "I love you," he would say, as he had said countless times before and would say countless times again. "You are my lady, now and always." Their story became legend in time, told and retold until it was hard to separate fact from embellishment. But the core truth remained, that an orc woman and a human man had chosen love over prejudice, had built a bridge between their peoples through courage and commitment, and had proven that the barriers dividing humanity from orc kind were illusions that could be shattered by simple respect and genuine affection. They lived long, full lives together, and when they finally passed from the world, it was within days of each other, as if neither could bear to exist without the other. They were buried together in a tomb that honored both their traditions, and people from both races came to pay respects to the couple who had changed the world. But their real legacy lived on in the communities they had helped build, in the friendships between humans and orcs that no longer seemed strange or scandalous, in the children of both races who grew up knowing that love could transcend any boundary. Benedict and Grishka had proven that peace was not just the absence of war, but the active choice to see the humanity in those we had been taught to fear. And it had all started with one simple act: a human lord bowing to an orc woman in chains and calling her "my lady" when everyone else saw only a monster fit for kitchen work. In that moment, Benedict had seen Grishka's true worth, and in being seen, Grishka had found the courage to hope for something better. Together, they had built that better world, one choice, one day, one act of love at a time. Their story proved that sometimes the most revolutionary act is simple kindness, that the most powerful weapon against hatred is respect, and that love, when it is true and brave and determined, can overcome any obstacle. Benedict and Grishka had faced prejudice from both their peoples, had weathered scandal and opposition and doubt, but they had never wavered in their commitment to each other and to the vision of peace they shared. In the end, they had not just found love, they had built a legacy that transformed their entire world. And it had begun with a bow, a title of respect given freely when none was expected, and two people brave enough to see past the barriers their societies had built to the truth of what they could mean to each other. That was the real magic of their story, not in grand gestures or dramatic battles, but in the quiet, revolutionary choice to treat each other with dignity, and to let that dignity grow into love.